So we are speaking on the occasion of the imminent release of Restitch These Wounds. So as we go through your discography, your first real official record, full length, was We Stitch These Wounds.
Right.
What was that recording experience like?
I've talked about it a lot recently because that's
Sure.
part of, talking about this. But the truth is, I don't have a lot of vivid memories of it, like the way that you're supposed to, right? The way that you're supposed to remember your first record and how exciting it is. It was like the record was in service of the greater plan, right? And because I knew that we didn't have the money to make it sound the way we wanted to, and because I knew that the studio we were recording in was subpar, the hours we had to keep were weird. A lot of that process is I remember more of like sitting in a room planning. You know what I mean? Because I get the mixes back and I go, it's not that great, but we'll do the best we can. Like, we'll keep going. We're going to keep pushing. So, I mean, we recorded it in a studio that's primarily used for like commercial jingles and things like that in LA.
And the guys who were engineering it were working on more important things by day.
They were working. Yeah. Blasco was the producer in the sense that, he was the guy that would come in and go like, move this, do this. But, he wasn't, and it's no fault of his. It wasn't like he was like a Feldy situation where he's like, there at the beginning of the day, whatever, you know what I mean? It was more like, here, let's just make sure that he gave us the reins and gave me the opportunity to just kind of make the record the way that I thought it should be made, and gave the guitar players the opportunity to write what they wanted. You know what I mean? And then he would come and we'd listen in the car basically to what we were doing, and he would say, this is good or bad. But the two engineers, Preston Babel, and Josh Newell, wonderful guys who do incredible work, but they were working with a little bit of a rusty toolbox when it came to this record. They were both working on other records. One in particular was working all day and into the nights on a Linkin Park record that was being made at the same time at a studio down the street. And then he'd get off work late, and basically that would be when I'd get the call at like 11 p.m. or midnight or 1 a.m. All right, it's time to do vocals. So then I'd go, and the only available room might be the like sub closet outside the tracking room to track vocals. So I'd go in there and do vocals in there. And in some cases I'm writing the melodies on the fly because we don't have enough songs done yet. So like a song like Never Give In, the melodies are terrible on that song, but I'm also just writing them as I'm singing the lines. Like I'm writing everything and going like, it's, trial and error as I'm tracking. So there were parts of that were very exciting. I can remember someone who is no longer in the band, and this was even before we started We Stitch These Wounds, saying to me that this band doesn't have the magic that you're supposed to have when you're in this era. Like every great band has a story for their first record, and there's no story for this record. And I remember thinking like, well, I don't really give a shit about that, because I'd imagine that in the future there will be a story. And here we are, 10 years later,
Sure.
there is a story.
You were not incorrect.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the story is it's a young band that had an audience based on a few little factors that was growing kind of underground, and it was time for us to make a record, and we had a very limited budget on a very small independent subsidiary label, and we did our best. And literally from the time I can remember, we went to El Torito, in what used to be El Torito in Burbank, and it was before the record was even out, and our sales had done so well at Hot Topic and retail stores, Spencer's, that kind of thing, but primarily Hot Topic, that we were being courted by major labels. And we had a meeting with one of the majors near where that restaurant was. And I remember sitting in the car outside of that restaurant and listening to the record before it was even out, just going like, this does not sound good. Like, this is not, the songs I was very proud of and everything, but I remember I would drive around LA, and I would try to put myself in the position of someone who had never heard it before. And does this record sound like what the message that I want to give, or the intended sonics? And this is not meant to be disparaging against the record or anybody who enjoyed it, but really from the moment that the record was complete to now, it never fit for really any of us the way that it was supposed to. It never sounded the way we wanted it to. It was never as big as we wanted it to be. It was never the statement that we wanted it to be. However, it, you know, it succeeded. And, you know,
It's
to the
important
degree
to
that
remember that this is a band and a concept and an ideology and all this sort of thing at this point already that you had conceived of from a very young age and were clawing and scraping to make real. So when you're hearing that recording back for the first few times, of course you're let down because it's not, you have this grand ambition and it hasn't
yeah.
been executed.
Well, and you know, it always felt like, particularly in the early years, that we were never the band that got the shiny thing. You know, we always had to fight for gloss and pomp and circumstance and all the things that just came along with being a band that was signed, that we saw so many of our peers get. We never had that. You know, if we wanted something done, we had to do it. There was never, because we were never darlings of any kind of scene, we never had, like, our first record wasn't a big budget, glossy, beautiful sounding record. Our first music videos weren't millions of dollar budget videos. Our, you know, and I don't mean first as in before we got signed, but once we were signed and once we were a band that was touring the world, we were still the only ones who, outside of our fan base, that believed in this as much as we did, you know. And that went on for a long time. And even to this day, I think that that's one of the things about the band that maybe has been the coolest thing, is that we've been, in many ways, we've done a lot of things just on our own, you know. You know, I made the artwork for the American Skin, you know what I mean? Like that's those, it never really occurs to us as much as maybe it does other bands to like pass off things. It's a lot of like, well, this is what we want to do, we'll just do it. And so that ethic kind of started then, and it pissed me off, and it kind of even furthered the like, well, we'll just do it on our own and we'll show everybody then. This record that nobody thought was worth enough money, or nobody thought to take the time on, it's going to succeed, and then we'll go to the next one and it'll be bigger and better. And, you know, it's kind of the trajectory of everything started there.
So going into the next record then, which the situation could not be any more different in that you have, you know, you're on a major label now. The band is much more established, is, you know, blowing up, for lack of a better phrase. When you go to make Set the World on Fire, what state were those songs in? Because the first record, of course, has songs from different eras and different iterations of the band prior to even getting there, and then songs that you were finishing in the studio. What was the state of the songs when you went to make Set the World on Fire? Were they all ready to go and rehearsed, or?
We Stitch These Wounds is a combination of a lot of things. It is songs that Jake and Jinx had written prior to knowing me, that I either wrote top line on, or I took, like, We Stitch These Wounds is the song that existed in a different iteration. And then it just so happens that Jake and Jinx had a song that sounded very similar, that I could literally just sing my lyrics and melody over with a few changes. So a lot of those songs started that way. Set the World on Fire, it was full, let's dig through every Jake and Jinx and CC demo, because they had worked together previously prior to being in the band. There was all these, I mean, that's why that record is so shreddy too, is because a lot of them were musical pieces that were written without the idea of having a melody over them. You know, a lot of those songs were literally, like, the idea was, here's like a 3.5 minute, 4 minute long guitar solo that's impossible to play, you know, and then it came to, well, now let's write over it. And so it really isn't until you get to Wretched and Divine that we started doing from scratch original material that didn't exist anywhere. Set the World on Fire is primarily, with a few exceptions, songs that were musical compositions that then lyrics and melody were written on top of. And in that instance, this is now, I'm no longer the guy who doesn't drink and everything else. Now I am a year and a half or 2 years into touring. I'm drinking every day. I'm told by the producer that I sound better when I'm drunk, tracking. So I, you know, at being 20 years old, or 20 years old at the time, I take that as gospel. So I go, great. So I would show up to the studio every day on that with, you know, boxed wine. I would take the bag out of the box and like throw it over my shoulder, like, like what do you call it?
Like a hobo on a boxcar train.
Yeah, it looked like bagpipes. Like it was
Oh,
like, you know, with the
yeah.
little like things that looked like bag. And I would just drink that all day, and then I'd go track and I'd write. You know, a lot of the lyrics, not all of it. I mean, I don't want to disparage the whole thing, but a lot of the lyrics on that record are a little bit of what I imagined someone in my position would say. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like a few of the songs on there, I have almost no personal connection to, because they have so little to do with how I actually felt, and more of what the expectation was. And because I was so young, and there was influences of people who were more interested in heavy and hair metal and those kind of things, I started to kind of just want to lean into that, because that was, you know, I wanted to be cool, and I wanted to be interesting, and I wanted to have a mystique about me and all that kind of stuff. And so there's about half of that record to me is, while I do enjoy it and I like the timeline of my life, and I know it's an important record to our fan base, it holds less, the songs themselves in many cases hold less of a special place for me. And not all, but some of them, I don't have a whole lot of personal connection to, because I don't feel like I was talking about anything. By the time we get to Wretched and Divine, I had a clear vision for what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, what I was saying, what the purpose of the songs were, and what kind of ideas they were servicing within the context of the songs. So, but yeah, I would say that Set the World on Fire and then into the Rebels EP, we discovered what the band would sound like if we had a big production, and we really leaned into that. I mean, I started reading about Mutt Lange and the wall of vocals,
Mm-hmm.
and how to make that sound. And
They're
so,
like
I mean, a song
70 backing
like,
vocals on one
yeah,
Def Leppard chorus. Yeah.
a song like Legacy is almost comical in the chorus, because there's so many harmonies. I mean, every possible note that could be put in as a harmony is in there. If you listen to those things isolated, the Luke Walker, who is the gentleman who did all the backing vocals on that record, he's singing 100 times, and we would sit in the booth and laugh, because I mean, it was unbelievable how high he could go and how low. And so he's doing all the backup vocals on that and the Rebels EP, and then the band would do the gang vocals. And I mean, it's sort of funny, because you can kind of hear his tone. Sometimes people don't know who that voice is, but he's got a very specific tone. And so Rebel Love Song and Coffin and those other things, you're hearing his harmonies. And because at the time, I didn't know how to harmonize. I couldn't sing harmonies. It would take me forever to try to learn them, and I didn't have the range. So now on current records, you know, on the most recent thing, I'm singing harmonies, as is Lonnie, as is other members of the band. But moving forward, I learned how to do it, and Feldy's the one who taught me how to do that. By the time, there was nobody to teach me, I didn't know how to do it. So we just had this Luke Walker, co-producer of the record, singing all the backups and building this wall of vocals. And I mean, I love it for what it is, but it is sort of funny in retrospect. Like, we would sit there for maybe an hour and go like, now the next harmony, now the next harmony, now the next harmony. And you could listen to them isolated and it sounds like Queen or something, but they're basically lost in the mix, because there's no way to hear like the highest of high vocals in there.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of fans probably don't realize about the way records are made, especially big production, big budget, major label rock records, that having any number of other people coming in and doing harmonies and backup vocals. I mean, you know, those AFI records, you know, Sing the Sorrow, December Underground, those records have a lot of other people. That's not all Davey Havok and Jade.
Yeah,
you know, the guy from, Steel Panther is on one of those records.
Well, for us, that turned into Feldy. Feldy has been in all the Feldy records that we made. The high harmonies on all those records, the ones that I can't sing, that's John Feldman. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's just, and also to your point about there's so much stuff happening, you couldn't possibly hear it all. You know, that's something that you'll see. You know, like when Metallica did the classic album special on the Black Album, and they're sitting there with listening back to some of those mixes for the first time, and they're finding things that they all had forgotten are even in there because they didn't make it to the, you know.
Yeah, there's so many little things. There's things
that
I know are in there, and I wish you could hear more, but maybe didn't get put in the mix in enough of a way, or something that maybe I'll listen to it and hear, but the average listener won't, because they weren't there the day that we were putting that bell in there or that chime or whatever it is, you know.